Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Schmelzer. I'm one of the directors of program management on the Visual Studio team at Microsoft. And what we want to talk about today is spend some time and talk about sort of how we can set up some processes that make our lives as SharePoint developers a little bit easy. And we'll look at ways that Visual Studio and the Visual Studio toolset, so including capabilities that are in Visual Studio Ultimate, as well as capabilities of Team Foundation Server, can all be pulled together along with some various PowerShell scripts and other things to actually help automate some of these processes and make our lives easier. Am I the only one that? Okay. Before we get started, just so I have a sense of kind of everybody's experiences in the room, maybe a quick show of hands. How many folks are developers building SharePoint solutions or going to be? All right. How many folks consider themselves more administrators or IT administrators or both, maybe, like kind of that wear two hats? Okay. Well, so we should have a little bit of stuff for everybody. We will, I'm a developer person myself, so we'll kind of take a view from the developer's point of view for a lot of this stuff. Now, I have quite a bit to go through, and I was joking with some of my colleagues this morning that this talk probably has more moving parts in it than, well, anything I've ever done and ever tried to pull together in 75 minutes. So we've got, development environments, we've got source code control servers, we've got build controllers, we've got build agents, we've got SharePoint instances, we've got all of that kind of stuff, drop shares, all things, and we got to get them all working together in the next 75 minutes. So that wasn't enough of a challenge for me, so I decided that in addition to that, I'll do it all in Visual Studio 2012 and Team Foundation Server 2012. I mean, why not? So we may run into one or two little bugs along the way. I think I know where most of them are, and I think I know how to get around most of them. But the other reason I say that is everything I'm going to show you, actually, you can do today with Visual Studio 2010 and Team Foundation Server 2010. And towards the end of the session, and actually in the end of the slide deck that is available, I've got some links to a set of resources where a lot of the stuff that I've either pre-created or will be modifying on the fly for you is available to download, and you should be able to just drop it in and it'll work for you in your 2010 environments. So a lot of the stuff you can see me go through, you can just pull up ready-made scripts and so forth. So I did a session on Tuesday. I don't know how many folks were there for sort of a overview of SharePoint development. There were a number of questions at the end about managing version numbers and things and a few other things like that. So I've also tried to throw some of that in at the end as well. So we've got a lot to go through. We do have a nice sized room here. So if you do have questions along the way, feel free to throw up your hand. If I, for whatever reason, am deep in the zone and don't notice it, you can yell at me and I'll stop and take it. If you have to throw things, okay, but make them soft, because otherwise it's no fun for any of us. Okay, with that, let's dive in. First thing, what's the whole motivation behind this? So a lot of SharePoint developers in the room, by the hands, and so this will be no surprise to you, but I think it is worth acknowledging that those folks that just do .NET development, they've got it easy compared to those of us doing things in SharePoint, right? Because we have all the complexities they have, and then a whole bunch more. We've got to deal with the code and all that kind of stuff, but we also have things like features, right, and packages that we have to manage. We've got services running in the SharePoint context, like the most popular one, probably timer jobs that we have to keep coordinated. We've got lots of things that we have to orchestrate as part of our solution to get it deployed. We also have deployment challenges that are kind of unique. In some respects, they're not that different from what you might find with just straight database kind of development, where we have things called solution packages that need to get deployed. There's not really a great rollback mechanism for those. So if you have a lot of these and some of them work and some of them don't, you have to figure out how to back changes out to keep consistent. Unit testing is a very popular technique these days for ensuring that as developers we're keeping our code reliable and working. So a way for us to quickly test the changes we make to make sure they're not having adverse effects other places. Unless, of course, you're in the SharePoint world, in which case it's extremely hard to do that. I asked this before. I'm always curious. How many folks are doing SharePoint development and doing unit testing? And how many of you are doing that true, like, religious unit testing where you're not actually running the real product in the back end? Yeah, that's pretty hard, right? And that's because the SharePoint object model is not conducive for those kind of things. We've got some stuff coming later this year that will help. Visual Studio 2012 does have in our testing framework, we now have better support for what we call fakes. And that's really the ability to have a detour framework or a mocking framework in place. And later in the year, we will be releasing a set of fakes for SharePoint to make your life easier to do unit testing against. But today, those are things you have to roll on your own to make work. So instead, you end up with more integration testing. Well, how can we, what kind of techniques can we use to maybe manage that and make that work a little bit better? So those are just the general problems, right, that we have, general challenges we have. Now let's go and talk about, well, what if you're working on a large SharePoint project? Now these are things that I've gathered from various conversations I've had with a number of customers, but they really fall into a few categories. First, just keeping track of what's going on. We talked about all the moving parts. It's not like there's necessarily just one solution and everything just gets X-copied to a location on a server or wherever. You've got lots of pieces that you need to keep related to each other. You've got lots of configuration files that you don't even necessarily manage yourself, right? And you may have to make changes to. You got to figure out how to make that stuff work. And then as developers, because we have to have SharePoint and Visual Studio on the same machine, that just means we have that many more deployments that we have to manage, right? We have to manage our own little environment in addition to our testing environments and staging environments and production environments. So we magnify the challenges a lot, I think, in SharePoint and when we get into larger projects. Speaking of that kind of developer environment thing, I hear from customers that they do spend a lot of time just keeping their own development environment up to date. Go away on vacation for a week, come back, the whole world has changed. Now you got to figure out how to get your SharePoint environment back up to sync so you can just start writing code. And I've heard stories of people taking, weeks to go repair their environment, and that's just not productive and not efficient. So that's something we want to try to go figure out. And then, of course, we're all human, right? As developers, although some people may think we're not, we are human, right? And that does mean we make mistakes. And sometimes they're just silly mistakes, a little typo somewhere, an edit change somewhere. Uh-oh, that could be bad. And it'd be nice if we could go and have a more consistent process for dealing with those kinds of things. So maybe automating more of the individual pieces and removing some of that chance for human error and mistakes to be made. Okay, so those are the challenges. What do we need? What would make our life better? Well, it would be great if we had one process that when we did a check-in or when we were ready, we could coordinate a single compilation of our solution and build all the solution packages we needed and know that, okay, this is a set that is supposed to be working together. So maybe through labeling, other techniques, we can go and have a consistent set of things so that as a developer, I can easily track what's in an environment, how do I get that from source so that I could go and fix changes, repro bugs, and those kinds of things. We talked about the versioning challenge. There are some unique challenges in the SharePoint world around assembly versioning and the way SharePoint looks at those things. And the techniques that some people would normally use are a little bit out of reach for us in the SharePoint world because they involve changing config files. So what are other ways that we can track this so that when we do need to look and figure out, okay, what version is on that machine, we have a way that we can go and do that. We're working locally as developers. We're working in our local environment. Visual Studio does a nice job of deploying into that local environment for me. But how do I deploy to a remote environment? I would love a way to automate that process so that I don't have to go and walk over to another machine and manually go and pull in these WSP files, activate the features, and so forth. We talked about testing. We talked about the fact that SharePoint makes it challenging to do things like unit tests because some of the things we need are actually only available when we're running in the context of SharePoint. So one way of approaching that is we can leverage things like UI testing and some of the UI testing capabilities that are available in Visual Studio to maybe automate some of that process for me and let it run in the actual environment. And of course, it'd also be nice to know when our colleagues, if we're working on a large project, have been checking things in and when builds are happening and getting notified of changes in the environment so that I can be made aware of, oh, it may be time for me to sync or maybe time for me to update my environment. Okay, so those are some of the, if those are the things that we're looking for, well, how does the tool set, or how could the tool set help? Well, as far as the automated compilation, we have things like the Team Foundation Server build process and the fact that these builds are built on top of workflows that allow us to not only synchronize steps, but also customize the steps that are going to be made as part of a build. So we can go and tweak this or modify it to our own needs, add additional capabilities, and so forth. As far as the automating of SharePoint, well, we have tools like PowerShell available to us. And there's a number of great PowerShell libraries out there for SharePoint development that allow us to do things like deploy solution packages, upgrade and activate features, create and remove sites, do all the kind of setup that we need to do. And then what's even better is that in an on-premise environment, we can enable things like SharePoint remoting. So now I can go and make these calls happen on a remote server, allowing us to go do this in these other environments that we want. So whether that be a staging environment, production environment, and so forth. Now that's a lot to throw at you, and you'll see it's a lot of different things that we need to work with. One thing I will say is that I don't think you need to be an expert in each of these kinds of technologies to actually be able to pull this off. I am certainly not an expert in workflow. I am certainly not an expert in PowerShell. I would say that I probably have good enough skills. I guess you guys will probably be the judge of that in the next hour or so, if I have good enough skills to pull this off or not. But it's just a matter of familiarity. You don't have to be deep. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff. There are a lot of great resources available to help you jumpstart and get going. And I have links to those towards the end of the talk. All right. You know what? I'm tired of looking at slides. We can do this in the product. So let's start at the first piece. We'll take a look at each of these individual pieces sort of in isolation, and then we'll tie them all together at the end. So hopefully this is going to come up looking correct for you, or really, really pink. Well, I'm not sure what I can do about that. Okay, so assume you guys will survive with pink for a little bit while we work on getting it fixed. Yeah, okay. So what I have here, for those of you that were in the session on Tuesday, I built a really simple little SharePoint solution that involved a custom web part and a custom list. That's what I'm going to start with here. I'm just going to use that for the purpose of our discussion today. So if I look at it, I'll just show you real quick what's going on. I have a custom list definition here that is just a simple task list for myself. Okay, thank you. So just the ability to have a simplified task list that I might want to work with. And then I have a web part here that is a visual web part. It is deployed, or can be deployed via a sandbox solution. So it's just a simple little web part here that gives me a little UI for actually creating that. Now in this case, this is a ASP.NET web form based web part. So we have server code and those kinds of things. Let's run it real quick so you can kind of see what we're going to be working with. So here we have our development site. You'll notice that I'm using site collections for myself to isolate these things. So for my development world, I've got this _develop site collection that I'm working against. For the rest of the demo, to simulate multiple environments, I'll use different site collections so that I can stay on one machine. Everything I'm going to show you works over multiple machines as well, but that amount of memory on my little laptop would have not been fun for any of us. So just to show you what this looks like, we got a little test page here. I'll open that up. And I'll create a task real quick. Add task. just to make sure everything works. Yep, task added successfully. If I go to my task list, we should see that we have that new task. Okay, you can go ahead and.
I have to switch the screen.
Sure, no problem. So while he's doing that, what we want to do is we've got the ability to go and compile this stuff now, and Visual Studio will create a solution package for me from the developer machine. One of the things you might have noticed is the other difference between the other day is I've also checked this into source code control at this point. So I have a TFS server also running on that same machine with a set of build controllers and build agents set up. So what I want to do in a minute is we'll go back and, hey, nice job. See, now, you guys have my expectations set. I'm expecting that much applause for... I'm just kidding. Okay, so you can see we have source code control, so we're checked into a Team Foundation server environment. If I go over to my Team Explorer, the first thing I want to do is I can go look at my builds. I've got a number of builds set up, but let's just go create a new build definition for our purposes so I can show you what we need to do. Build definitions, fairly straightforward. We can give it a name. Let's call it CI demo. We have triggers. These are important. We'll come back to them later, but basically, it's still kind of washed out, but good enough. So we can set these up to be manual. That's what I'll do to begin with, so I can just queue them manually. By the time we're all done, we'll get to continuous, where as a developer does a check-in, it'll automatically kick off a build in our entire build process. Of course, if you don't want to do it that way, you can do rolling builds. So you can accumulate changes and every so often do a build. Nightly builds are the scheduled approach. And then gated check-ins are also something that's really interesting that if we have time, we might play with as well. In this case, what will happen is when you check in a change, a build will kick off, and tests will run. Any tests you define will run. If that build passes those tests, then it'll complete the check-in. If it doesn't, if it fails the build, so it doesn't compile, or fails one of your tests, it'll automatically go into a shelve set, and you, the person who checked it in, will get notified that you have changes that have not been accepted into the source tree yet. So prevents that break the build scenario a little bit. Pretty interesting set of capabilities there. So we'll keep with manual for right now. Workspace is where we want to pull from. And then we need to specify some defaults. So we need to choose the build controller. In this case, I only have one, so it's defaulted. And we need to specify the location where we want these builds to be put. So this is usually a UNC share. So in my case, I've got a share here on my machine, VSALM, drop. Oops. Should pick that up. There we go. So we have that stuff defined. Then the big key here is what is referred to as the process template. What's the workflow? What's the flow you want the build to go through? In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a new process template, but I'm going to base it off of the default one that ships in the box. I highly recommend doing your own copy of it so that you can always go back to the default one if things get really, really haywire on you. So we'll create a new one. You can see that we recommend that so much that we actually make it really easy to copy one into a new one. And we'll call this, we'll call it the TechEd CI build process template. Oops, we'll say OK. So that's gone and just created a separate copy of the workflow definition. If I double click on this, you see it's sitting in source control. If I open it up, and we'll spend more time in here, we'll see this is the workflow definition of that build task. And it's pretty robust and pretty complete. And these are collapsed activities. We'll get into more of that in detail in a second. But let's just start with a simple one. Let me go back to my CI demo. We have a number of properties that we can set. Most of these, by default, are going to be correct in what you're looking for as far as where to pull things. You notice that by default, we will run tests, and we just use a naming convention. So any assembly that's got tests in the name, we just assume is a test assembly. And we will go look for tests in there and execute those as part of your build, and so forth. Now, the key here for SharePoint is we do need to tell the SharePoint project system that we are interested in getting not just the assemblies, but also the solution package. So we need to pass an argument into MS Build here, and it's /p is packaging equals to true. Pretty straightforward, right? So that's just going to tell that the whole build system, the MS Build system, that we're interested in the package in addition to just assemblies. And of course, we have retention policies as well if we're interested. Okay, so we'll save that. Let's go over here. Let's check this in right now, just so that the build server gets it. Okay, we can close that. So now we have our build definition. Let me go back over here into our Team Explorer. And for our builds, we will find our CI demo build. Now I'm just going to right-click, and I'm going to queue a new build. And we're going to give it a high priority to try to move it as fast as possible. And we'll say queue. We see we've just added a build to our queue. If I double-click on it, we can take a look at what's actually happening. You can see we've already got it picked up by the controller. It's being sent off to a build agent. And we'll start seeing the results of the build here. In this case, it's not extraordinarily verbose. Just going to show us a little bit of the tasks going on. And this will probably take, I don't know, 30 seconds or so at the most to actually compile the first time. And if everything worked right, we should get a nice green tick that says our build was successful. And we have a nice green tick on that side. And we have the green tick over here. So we have a successful build. If we look at the drop folder location, we see that just as we were looking for, we have the DLLs and we have a solution package in there, a WSP file. So we've got everything we need now to go deploy this solution. Cool? Okay, what other magic happened in here? What else did I do beforehand that I didn't show you right now? There is one thing that we need to do to set up a build server to build SharePoint solutions, and that is copy the set of SharePoint-specific assemblies that we may have referenced in our code. That's it. That's all we had to do was copy those onto the machine. In my case, that was easy to do because I have Visual Studio on the same machine as my build server, so they were already there. The other thing we need to do is make sure that the MS Build targets files that Visual Studio uses in the IDE are in the right location on the build server as well. Very simple step. Just one set of two files you need to copy into the appropriate build tasks folder on that machine. Again, the links that I have at the end give you exactly the details. It takes 2 seconds. Even a director of program management can do it without causing a problem. So, okay, so that's a build. We're going to get in here a little bit, but let's go and do one thing real quick. Let me go edit the build definition. Go into our process. An important thing to note is that Visual Studio is going to go, and specifically TFS is going to go and always be pulling, when it does builds, from the source control, right? So it's always going to go and try to do that. So sometimes if you're making changes and you don't see them apply, it's probably because you haven't actually got your changes synced with the build server yet. So you're going to want to check in and do those kinds of things. Let's see. This was I think this was the one we just did, right? Tech Ed CI build process. I get too many of these in here. Let me walk you through this a little bit. I said this is fairly involved. The most interesting part, let me try to collapse this so it's mostly readable. The most interesting part for us, see, it's robust, that we're going to be working with is this section here that says run on build agent. That is where most of the stuff that you're going to want to do to customize your build workflows and your build tests are going to happen in here, because this is the part of the workflow that really does run on that agent, and this is also the part that has most of the values you're interested in pre-populated, like where's the source live right now, where's the drop locations, all those kinds of things are there. What we could do here, just to give you a sense of what we're going to start working on, let me see. Yeah, I don't need that. That made that even more complicated than it should be. So let's just go here, and we'll go in and just drag a simple task. You'll notice that all of the workflow components, there are a lot of custom activities created for Team Foundation Server builds. Those are all here available to us. We can reuse those in our workflows. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one that says write build message, I'm just going to pop it out here so that we can sort of give ourselves a little message here. So we'll go in here, we'll configure this, and we'll give ourselves a little notice that, hello from the build. Okay, save that. I'm also going to change the priority of this to make sure it shows up. So if I go ahead and close this, save that change, yes, we'll override it. That's not going to be good. Oh, crap. Get latest. Check out Reddit. And our change is going to be gone. Sorry, let me clean this up real quick. Collapse, collapse, collapse. Come on. Yeah, our change is not there, of course. So you get collapsed too, so don't keep seeing you. All right, let me just drag that out one more time. This now says, hi. Okay. Save. Yes. Check in pending changes. Yes, check them in. Doing the good developer thing and not putting a comment in there. I'm sure you guys will forgive me. Okay, let's go back in here and queue our CI demo build again. Queue it, high priority, go. And now what we'll see is we should see the same kind of thing. Just towards the bottom of our log, we should just get a little message, right? Just showing how we can go and customize these things a bit. And that's actually the location that we'll start doing some of our additional stuff later on when we tie it all together and want to go actually deploy these things and use some PowerShell stuff. So let's just let this guy go for a minute. Actually, while that's happening, there's an interesting tool that by default doesn't run. It's this build notifications tool. So now I'll have a little thing in my task tray here. So we don't have to watch the builds all the time anymore. We can actually let the task tray come up and tell us. So if I go look at the log for the build, we should see right down here at the bottom, hello from build, right? So we see that I am executing my customized workflow at this point. Okay. So that's just a little bit of kind of the process for how do we automate a build as it relates to Visual Studio and SharePoint development specifically. All right, let's talk a little bit about testing. I mentioned that one of the things that, we talked about the fact that unit testing is a challenge for SharePoint today. A lot of times we need the context that is available only when we're running in SharePoint to actually have our code work. So, maybe we're using the SP context, we're getting lists and those kinds of things. An easy way to automate that is actually to take advantage of the coded UI testing that's available in Visual Studio. It allows us to record a test based on user interactions as a starting point. Then we can go in, and it's just code, so we can go in if we need to and want to and modify that, whether that's doing additional parameterization, doing additional customization of that script, and then check it in, and then we, of course, can associate them with builds as well. So let's jump back over and take a look at kind of the whole coded UI concept in Visual Studio. So let's switch back to Solution Explorer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to add a new project to my solution. And in the test area, in the test category, in Visual 2010, we didn't break these out. We just by default gave you a unit test. We did get the feedback that some folks just wanted to create coded UI tests, so the fact that they created a test and they had a unit test they had to delete was just a little bit annoying. So we do have separate templates now. We can just start with a coded UI test. We'll just call it coded UI test project, and we'll say OK. The little wizard's going to come up and ask us, all right, well, how do you want to get started? Do you want to actually start recording a UI script right now, or do you have an existing recording that you want to pull in and base this on? In our case, we don't have one yet, so we'll go ahead and start a recording. And we'll give it a second. And down in our bottom right corner of our screen here in a minute, we'll see our little recording tool pop up and start helping us. Right? And so now what I can do is you're going to want to get your environment kind of the way you want it, and we can just start the recorder. So we'll start the recording, give it a second to get going, and now we can just go and start working through the process that we want to be recorded. So I'll go in here. Let's do Internet Explorer. We'll launch Internet Explorer. It'll come up. I'll type in the URL I'm interested in. So I'll say http://VSALM. That's my site. Sites. And let's just record this immediately against our test site. I'll hit enter. Here's my test site. We can navigate to site pages. I've got a test page already set up. Right? So now I'm at the point of my app that I want to be testing. Now you can break these up however you want. I like to kind of get them a little bit modular, so I'm going to go ahead and say pause on the recorder. And I'll ask it to generate those steps for me. And we'll call this, launch browser. Okay, so it's going to generate that code for me. It's going to create that method. Now we're right back. We're still in a recording session, so I can say record again. This will resume recording. And now let's go use the UI here to actually create a task. So we'll set a title, pick a due date, and we'll click Add. And we see that it's successfully added. We see it's down on our list. Go ahead and pause the recording again. Tell it to generate that code. And we'll just call this, create task. Add that. And now what I want to do is I actually want to start doing some validation. Right? So what we can do is we can do an assert and check a value. Now you see we have a nice little thing here that says task added successfully. Boy, that was nice of the developer to put that in. That'll be an easy way for us to see if this worked. So we can go and we can use our assertion tool here, and we can go and drag this out and start highlighting the elements of the page until we find what we want. So in this case, we'll say that's what we're interested in. We're interested in that UI element. It's going to go gather the properties of it. We can look at the specific property we want. In this case, we care about the inner text. And I can add an assertion. And we can do any kind of assertion here we want. We can exactly equal, contains, equal is going to work for us. And then we can give ourselves a message that if the assert failed. So we'll say, task not created. Say OK. So that's specified an assertion for us. We'll say generate. Now it's going to generate a method for us. And we'll say, assert task created. Add and generate. So now we've got, all the way through that. Let's go do one more recording session. We'll start the recorder again. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to kind of clean up after myself. So we'll delete this item from the list. And then we'll close the browser instance. Pause. Generate code. And we'll just call this, clean up. And add and generate that. And now we're done. So we'll close our tool to indicate that we're done with our recording session. And we're now dropped right back into Visual Studio. So what happened to all that stuff? Well, for the most part, we now have this nice set of action-based methods that we have available to us to go execute our coded UI tests that we just automated. And now I can move these around anywhere I want. I can reuse them. I can start modifying them and parameterizing them. If I wanted to pull and make this a data-driven test and write code to actually go query, some sort of data file, database, or XML file or whatever, I can do all that in here. It's just code at this point that I own and I can go modify. But they've gone and done most of that automation work for me. All right. Well, let's see if this actually worked. Let's go ahead and go into our test menu. Let's just run all the tests. In this case, there's only one. And see if this is actually working. So it's going to go and it's going to build the test. So it should only see one project get built. And then we should see Internet Explorer pop up, navigate to our test site, and go create a task. Come on. It should do it a lot faster than that. Okay, build succeeded. Where's Internet Explorer? There's Internet Explorer. Here comes our URL. There's our site. Go click on site pages. Go click on test page. Add a task. Task added. Now we're going to delete it. So we've passed the assert. We've gone past the assert. Delete that. Close Internet Explorer. And we're done. Kind of cool. It figures. There was actually a bug in there that we didn't actually hit this time.
One question.
Yes.
We have more than one entry in the list. How is it identified? You have only one entry in the list. In the past, we have some problems identifying such the correct data item to delete, to complete the,
Yep.
the circle.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what happens if, I have a nice pristine test environment, right? I created something brand new. I added one item to the list. I knew that I could remove the one item in the list, right? I wasn't going to have any problems. So there's two ways to handle it. One is actually to go and create your environments as pristine as possible. So when we get further down and we look at how we actually automate this, you'll see that through PowerShell, we could even parameterize that to the extent that if you're doing continuous integrations and you're tying tests in it, that each test and each deployment gets a unique site, right, that you can go and run your tests in, so you can keep yourself pristine. If that's not going to work, and you don't want to go that route, then you get into where, okay, it's code, and I can write some code to go figure out which thing I want to remove. So whether that is actually writing code to query the list, because you could capture what we put in, and you could query the list, find it, and know which one to delete. I mentioned that all morning long and all night last night, there was a bug here that we didn't actually run into. And it was giving me a nice excuse to show you a little bit more of this code. So we'll just go in there anyway. So here's sort of what the generated code looks like. Let's go full screen on this. Where am I? Full screen. Get some stuff out of the way so it's a little bit easier to see. So what you see here is the tool does a pretty good job of creating code that's actually quite usable as a developer if I want to go in and modify these things. So one of the problems that I was having this morning was when we started the launch URL process, we never actually got another correct launch, or we never got a correct enter. So we came up with the blank about page. You saw the URL go in there, but we never actually activated the typing, so it never navigated, and then the test just started failing, saying, okay, I can't find anything now. Well, so to fix that, I was able to just go in and actually, rather than going to the blank one, like let's say we don't want to see typing. Actually, that's the way we could do this. If we didn't want to see typing at all, I could come in here and say, you know what, rather than going to the blank page, switch it with the value that's just below it and say, let's go to, oops, come here. Let's just go directly to the value that was going to be entered anyway, right? And then we wouldn't actually see the typing of the URL as part of the actual test, and it would speed it up a little bit. So those are some things we could do. I'm not going to push the demo guides too much. We'll put it right back the way it was. All right. So that's what's going on there. We can do other fun things in here. We can add whatever we want, right? So we could add sleep statements. You saw that maybe I clicked a few more places than I really wanted to. It's like that tends to happen when you're creating these. I was actually pretty good this time. I didn't go too crazy. But oftentimes I'll find that, I clicked more than I really wanted to. All right, that's fine. You just nuke them, and they're not part of your test anymore. So there we go. That's kind of coded UI testing, a nice way of automating things for ourselves within the test or within the kind of the Visual Studio environment. Okay, let's hop back over here. So far we've seen two parts. We've seen how we can automate a build using Team Foundation Server, and we've seen how we can create coded UI tests that will allow us to actually automate the testing of our SharePoint solutions in context of SharePoint. So kind of a good tool for creating what I would think of as more traditional integration tests, right, where you actually want to run things in the environment. Let's see, what else is in here? We'll see most of this in the rest of the demos. So the key is that bottom one. If you are using, you want to make sure the test assemblies that you have created, if you want to have them automated and run as part of the build on that SharePoint server, you want to make sure they actually get deployed to that environment as well so they can actually be executed. All right. So adding coded UI tests to a build. This is kind of an anticlimactic demo because all we're going to do now, let's just go over here. We will check in that test project. To source control. And it's done. Go back to our solution. Go back to our Team Explorer. Drop down our builds. And let's queue another build. Set it high again. And what should happen this time is because if you remember when we looked at the build workflow, the default template that we have is set up to execute tests. And it looks for any assemblies that are part of the solution that have test in the assembly name. And I believe I left mine with test in it. As this runs and executes, it's going to do the build, it's going to do all that normal stuff, and then it's going to go and execute the test. Now, there's one little thing that's kind of weird with what I'm doing, right? I'm building it, but then I'm not actually deploying it. I'm running the test against something that's already deployed. But you can trust me, we'll fix that later. And where'd my test go? We should have seen Internet Explorer pop up and start cruising around on us. Hey, we have no test results. All right, let's go take a look at what we messed up. So let's go edit our build definition. Automate tests. Yes. Yes. Fail build on test failure. I don't really care. All right, let's make sure I didn't do something really boneheaded. Let's go. Excuse me? Good point. Let's also make sure that, yep.
Which credentials does the test run on?
What are you doing now? Couldn't find unit test project. That's great. I don't care because I don't have one. Resolve conflicts. How about that? Nope, no conflicts that way. All right, let's do something a little crazy here. Where is my... 1 second. Let me go do the really fun thing here. Apparently I have an old reference in a solution file. Open with Notepad. See, these are the fun things that we get to do when we work on interim builds. All right. Let's go quickly do a find here. Unit test. Of course not. Project, demo, project, there, coded UI. That's killer. Huh. Let's try this one more time. Oops, hold up. So someone was asking what credentials the tests run as. Right now they run as the actual build agent. So you would need to give the build agent access to what you're trying to do. Let me go close this and open it again as admin so that if we ever F5, we can talk to SharePoint correctly. File open. Take a demo. Let me do this. Check you in. Yes. Okay, that one's good. And then let's go get latest on the solution file. See if we have a conflict. No conflict. That could be bad. Check it in again. Don't yell at me. All right, you have to trust me. I got my solution file all messed up. But it should have picked it up automatically, and that is the problem, is that it, for whatever reason, doesn't even know we have the test, and because the build agent is pulling from source, right, all the time, it's going to go and not see that that thing is actually there. It shouldn't actually matter because they're actually being compiled. They should be being compiled as any, so it should run anyway. We can play with that. Why not? Oops. Build any. Yeah, see, they're getting compiled as any, so it should work. I'm not going to spend too much more time, and it shouldn't kill us too much for the rest of what we want to do. You'll have to just trust me the tests are running, or can be run. Okay. Yes?
Question back to under which account the code UI test runs. What happens if we have tried to test the multi-user SharePoint infrastructure and switch user credentials somehow?
Sure. So tell you what, hold that thought for a minute. Let me show you what's actually going to happen when we do the hold the thought, or the person next to you, whichever you. When we actually get to doing the remote deployment, what we'll actually do is we will be able to deploy and publish somewhere else, and we can also remotely execute some of these tests. So now we can go and really control credentials through the PowerShell scripts of how we're actually going to go do those things. Assuming that I get that other problem doesn't kill us too much. So in your mind, you saw coded UI tests integrated into a build as part of the process. But we don't actually have to stop there. This is a completely customizable build process. So we can look at lots of other interesting things and incorporate them in as part of our flow. So for example, if we want to do code analysis, we can get that data as well. So if we have code analysis turned on, we can see how much of our code we're actually covering with our automated tests and report on that. So we could look at whether or not we're drifting away from the code coverage numbers that we're interested in and look to have as we're adding more code. If we're adding more code, maybe we need to add more tests or modifier tests to cover it. Unit tests can, of course, be incorporated in this if you go down that route. You can also pull in the other tools that are really common for SharePoint developers to take advantage of, like SP dispose check, right? So you could run that as part of your build, and other static analysis tools can run as part of the build and fail the build if things don't pass or don't pass to a threshold you're interested in. Load tests can be run as part of these workflows as well. So if you want to deploy, test under load, you can do that. What's also cool, and this is what we won't see unless I get the test actually working, is that when tests fail, we can set up what data we want to be collected as part of the test run, and we can get lots of interesting things, including the standard stuff like performance logs, error logs, and stuff from the machine that the test was run on. But we can also take advantage of what I think are really cool, more advanced features of the testing tools in Visual Studio. We can get screen capture recordings of where the error happened. So the tools will take a screenshot of what the UI looked like when the coded UI test failed and include that as a file as part of this report so we can go look and it's like we were there, right? It's just part of you could turn on the entire recording session if you wanted to. I probably wouldn't do that in a kind of a continuous integration build environment because you're just going to get lots and lots of video files. Whereas that one screenshot is probably all you need. But if you're familiar with the way those tools work, is when a tester uses the testing tools, they can go all the way down to the point of actually gathering a complete video of what the tester did as part of going through that. So I don't know if, I mean, this never happens inside of Microsoft where a tester finds a bug and the developer says, I can't reproduce it. I don't know what you did. And eventually I have to take the two of them, put them together, and they look over each other's shoulders to see, oh, you clicked there. Yeah, okay, now I understand how you got it. Well, the video capture does that, right? It shows you exactly where the user clicked the whole way around. It's like you were there without actually having to be there. So all those things we can go add into our builds. All right, so what is it that we really want to get to? Where do we really want to end up with this solution? Well, the environment that I'm going to try to set up for you is to have the developer's instance, right? So that's core part of my laptop, Visual Studio and SharePoint installed. So I'm doing my iterative development. I'm doing my testing in that environment. When I'm good with my changes, I'm going to check them into Team Foundation Server, check them into source control. When that happens, we'll set it up to do continuous, but you could do it any of those processes, right, nightly or whatever. We'll kick off a build on the build server. When the build is done, we'll deploy that via PowerShell to our staging environment inside of SharePoint. We can run tests. We'll run tests against that if I can get that part working. I'm not too confident in that right now. Or this is also where our human testers can go and test against that environment and collect the data. Bugs we'll send back into Team Foundation Server. Those will come back to the dev. I'll fix the bug, and the whole process will repeat. So that's what we're going to try to do here in the next few minutes. Anybody got odds on how successful we are? Yeah, you're laughing already. Okay. So as you can expect, this is where we're going to get into a little bit of workflow work. So we'll go back into Team Explorer, go back to our builds, and we will go down to our CI demo build. Oops, sorry. Didn't want to open it. I'm going to go edit our build definition, go into our process, get a hold of our actual process template, the workflow. So it'll take us through source control, TechEd CI process template, and we'll open this up. Okay, so there's our basic workflow. I said that really run on agent was the place that we were going to be most interested in doing things. Now, what we'll do is first we're going to go and add a sequence down here. So we'll go into our toolbox, we'll grab just a standard workflow sequence activity, and we'll drop it in here after the compilation has happened. We could go in and modify some of the other things if we wanted to, but we've got our sequence here. Let's give it a name so we understand what's going on. Call it, excuse me? It should be checked out for me. It should be. Yeah, we got a little tick on it, so we're good. But thank you. You guys didn't want to watch me do it twice again, huh? So we'll call it deploy WSP, just so we have a name for it. Now what we want to do is we actually want to go and take advantage of an extremely powerful little workflow activity that the Team Foundation Server guys gave us to go. Well, it's not quite that powerful. It's more generic than that. They didn't go so far as to invoke PowerShell. They went even more generic and gave us an invoke process. Same idea, though. So we now have an invoke process task or activity that we can drag on, and we're going to use this to invoke some PowerShell scripts. So we'll come over here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. A little bit. And so as you can imagine, as far as the file we want to actually go execute, we're going to say go run. This is the name of the executable, right? We'll run PowerShell.exe. That's what we want to run. There's some other things we're going to need to do. We want the result of this to get reported back somewhere and specifically into a workflow variable that we can use elsewhere in the flow. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and I'm going to go to the workflow and I will create a new variable. And we'll call this deployment process results. Or exit code. How about that? Exit code. That's going to be an integer. And we'll scope it just to this activity, right? So we can do all of our work inside of here. And let's default it to 1. Okay, so we have a variable. Come over here, specify that that's what we want this to go into. Deployment. What are you doing? Deploy. Let's see how close we got. Deployment process. Nope, not quite. Process exit code. There you go. Now he's happy. And the last thing we need to do is specify the arguments that we want to pass to PowerShell to make all this stuff happen. So we'll pop this open, and we'll go in and specify what we need to do. So we're going to do a string.format. So you guys like that bug? So you do get IntelliSense in this when we don't have a bug. So if you are using the 2012 release candidate, that is a bug. There's already a fix for it. I just wasn't brave enough to apply it this morning. So let's go in and specify what we actually want to go on here. So we'll go in and we'll say, we want to run the script that is sitting in my builds/scripts folder. And I'll show you this script here in a minute. But I have a master build script .ps1. And then we need to specify a couple parameters to it. Oops. And those are going to be the some values from the build detail object. So build detail dot drop location. So this will pass in where we're actually grabbing, where the build was actually put, where the workflow put it. And then we'll do build detail dot drop location root. Okay? If I did that correctly, we won't get any funny things going on there. All right, so now we have our sort of workflow going. We're going to shell out to a PowerShell script that's going to do some work. And I promise I'll show you that in a second. Let's do a couple more things just to help diagnose some stuff if something goes wrong. We'll use our friend write build message. We'll drop one here. And we'll go in here and say, yay, it worked. That's the one we hope to see. We'll do another one, drop it over here. And if we get an error, let's just go dump the output into our build log. Okay? So that's what our workflow is going to go do. It should pick up the WSP, shove it over to the machine that I care about. Let's go. Let me show you real quick what these scripts look like. So I have a number of scripts sitting in here. Master build script is the one that sort of starts the whole process off. It pulls in a few other scripts. To make my life easier, I have this credentials.ps1, just a cheating way of having the actual authentication credentials that I care about sitting in some file so it's easy for me to change. I'll show you in a little bit later how we can actually surface these things as actual arguments into the overall build process. So if you don't want to have them just sit in files, you can actually have them flow in and change them as part of the build definition if you really want an extremely reusable solution. But anyway, we're just going to go off. We're going to you see that I've commented some things out. This script is set up to do actual remote PowerShell. I just don't need to do that because I'm on the same machine. So I've modified some of those things to be more of a local thing. Again, these are available to download. I'll show you where the link is. So you can take a picture of it or you can download it too. I was joking about this the other day. Like, you can see with my gray hair, I've been doing this for a while, and the world has changed from seeing everybody frantically write things down to a bunch of flash bulbs go off in my face, and I have to realize it's not me, it's whatever's on the screen that you care about. All right. So we've got that. Let's go see how good we did. Let me close this, save that, go to source control. Let's check this in. Could be. Yeah, we can look real quick. No, it's just not. It's like, for whatever reason, it's just completely skipping it. Let's go into our build. Let me just kick this off and see what happens. The biggest downside we'll have is that it'll work faster because you won't actually see the test run. But let's go set this to high. Let's queue it. Let's go see what happened. And so now we're going to kick off the build. And what should happen is we'll get a build. We'll get the WSPs. The PowerShell will kick in. It'll deploy it into my other site. And I've actually got it set up to deploy into a site collection I called prod on my machine, so I didn't mess up my other test one. So this is going to run and do all that stuff. It should go send those things over. This one should take a little bit longer because it's going to actually go deploy all that stuff. So, and we should get a notification when it's done. So I might go and switch off and see what happens here in a second. But yeah, that was too fast. Okay, let's view the log and see what happened. Update build number. Invoke process got called, and invoke process worked. Let's see. I think I called it prod. Yeah, it doesn't look like it worked. If it worked, oops, site pages, new page. If it worked, we can go see, yeah, we don't even see custom. So, didn't work. Now, let's go look real quick at the build definition and make sure. Packaging true. Edit the build definition. View that again. Build process. PowerShell. Okay, so what we will do is go into our. Let's go into this one. So this one should be pretty much the exact same thing. Nope, not the exact same thing. Different one. Which one did I play with earlier today? Test build process? There we go. Okay, we're going to switch and we're going to use this one instead. Test build process. Oops. All right. Queue a build. Anyway, so while this is going, that's just some coding in front of a couple hundred people mess up that I didn't notice. So that, as you see, there's lots of little things we got to go. And normally, when it fails, we get a nice failure report. And this one's failing because, interesting. Well, we can fix that. Edit. Because I'm not actually using it in this example. So we will go in here, edit this, drop down to here. This is an easy fix, I hope. You go away, and you go away. Okay, close it, save it, check it back in. And queue it again. All right. So that's actually one of the challenges that I had. One of the fun parts of moving was that some of the stuff in the Team Foundation Server thing has changed since 2010, 2012. And whatever. It's not going to be my day. All right. So that should have worked. So again, imagination-wise, that all works. That is the steps you go through. And as I said, if you're doing it in 2010, there's two great things you have going for you. One, there is already a set of things in the links that you can download that are these two XAML files, right? spbuild and spbuild no versioning. If I pop that open for you, what you'll see is this is the build workflow that on a Team Foundation Server 2010 machine will just work, will call the PowerShell scripts that are also available in that download and go do all the remote deployment to your environment. So you don't have to go through the steps I did of manually setting it up. It will just work. It doesn't work for me in 2012 because some things have changed. So that's why I was trying to put it together for you. OK. So at this point, we have seen how we would approach setting up a continuous integration build with SharePoint and Visual Studio. We haven't seen it work, but we saw how we go about it. The last thing I want to do is show you how we would also go tack on the ability to deal with this versioning challenge that some people run into with SharePoint. One of the common ways I've heard people address it is to, rather than doing assembly versioning, they'll actually just put file version numbers in, right? So that when you right-click and see properties, you can see a file version. You just don't have to change the assembly versions. Now, it'd be really nice if that happened as part of the build process, right? So you knew they were all consistent and in sync. So that's what we're going to go ahead and try to go do. So let's go into our build templates. We'll pull this one back out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and take advantage of a couple of custom workflow activities, also available on Codeplex to download, that will go and do that for us. So we'll go in here to our run on agent in the initialize workspace area. Let me clean this up a bit. Create workspace, get clean workspace, right here. Get workspace. So after get workspace, this is what I'll do, because this will give us the stuff that we need. So we will have gotten, the get workspace is basically the activity that goes and does the get latest from source control and puts it somewhere. And that's kind of where we want to start messing with things, right, is at that point before it gets built. So over here in my toolbox, if I scroll down, you'll see I have these two activities sitting in, right, I just added them to a general folder. You can add them wherever you want. These are custom workflow activities that some great MVPs, SharePoint MVPs, went and created and put up on Codeplex for you. So you can get the source for them, and you can just get them as compiled activities. And what we'll do is we're going to drag the update assembly version number activity into our workflow. And you'll see that this has two properties it's surfacing: update assembly file version and update assembly version. So we can have it do both. We can have it update the assembly version and the file version, or we can, the reason we wanted this thing was to just mess with the file version. And so you see that's what they defaulted it to, setting it into true and false. So now if I go and execute this, what we get are our assemblies. The version numbers would no longer change, but we would stick a new file version number in there that would be consistent across all of our assemblies that are part of our solution package. So we can do it this way. I mentioned that for a lot of the parameters that we're feeding around, right? I did a little cheat and put them in a PowerShell script for my deployment stuff, so I could just read them out of there. If I want to start surfacing those things more, like higher up into my build definition, let me show you how we would do that in this case for the assembly version info. So what we'll do is we'll go in, and I'm going to elevate these to actually be arguments that come into the workflow as a whole, right? So we'll come over here, and we will create two new arguments. And we'll have one called update assembly version number, or update assembly version. We'll have that be an in. Let's have it be Boolean, and we can default it to false. So if our folks that we're working with don't know exactly which one to do, they'll at least get the right values. And the other one we'll put in here is update assembly file version. Have that be an in parameter, also a Boolean, and we'll have that set to be true. Okay, so now we have these arguments available. I should now be able to go back to, let's get that out of the way, go back to my update assembly version thing, and now rather than setting these things to just true or false, I can set them to those new arguments. And so I could set this to update assembly file version. So you see when I tab, I got completion, so we know it's there. And this one, we will change to update assembly version. All right, so now we're going to feed it through. Do what? Oh, did I get it? Oh, sorry. There we go. Update assembly version. Okay, so now those are passing through from the higher level arguments to the build definition. Let's save this. Let's say yes. Let's check that into source control. Let's go back to our process. Let's close it and open it again to make it refresh. Added the build definition. Choose a process. Should go query it again. And what we should see is a new section down here. We should get some new properties showing up. Oh, right. Thank you. Yes, I'm got to go to use the actual real one. We played with this one, right? That's okay one. Thank you. Okay, do that. Now, there we go. These two new properties have shown up down on the bottom. Cool. So now we have a very nice reusable set of build tasks and workflows that we can use. So when people are creating new templates, they can just pull this stuff up, and these things show up automatically. You know, we've done nice things and defaulted them for the way we think our coworkers want to work, and so forth. Make sense? And again, that same technique we can use to surface all of that information that we were passing on to PowerShell and all those things, and we can flow it all the way through and let it be up here, or you can bury it further in, whichever you want to do, depending on how your environments are set up. All right. So a couple things. Again, this is coming from a lot of customers that I talk to. All of them that I've talked to that have not done this on the first day of the project have wished they'd done it on the first day of the project. So, you know, if you have the environment, if you have this, you know, if you feel like you're going to have multiple people working on the project, you're going to have, you know, SharePoint solutions that involve multiple components and those kinds of things, highly encourage you to think about getting into an automated process early. It'll save you on understanding what is in what environment. It will save you on the developer time of setting up your machine. So if you go on a holiday for a couple weeks, you can just run your own kind of build and deploy back to your local machine, and you're all in sync again with whatever everybody else was using. You know, the idea that the ability to go and do this incremental versioning is great. So now we have a labeled way, you know, a way of just looking at the files to see what they are. We can sync that with a label and source control if we want to as well. Again, all just through the configuration of these build tests so that we can actually go and look inside of source control and say get by label, and that would match the version numbers you have in your file. And UI testing, I think it's an interesting thing to look at. The coded UI test, I think, is extremely fun because it's sort of the best of both worlds. As a developer, I have code that I can play with that is testing things, but I also don't have to write all of it. I can get some tools that actually go help me a little bit. Yeah, some other great stuff going on. I think that other one is either right after lunch or right now. I can't remember which, the coded UI test one. And the fakes one was yesterday, so that would be one to go check out on the So this is in the deck, but this would be the one, if you're going to take a picture of this one. These are, tried to shrink the URLs for you a little bit. These are the locations where you can go download. The bottom two are downloads for the custom scripts and custom activities that we took advantage of. So those are the bottom two. The top one is a blog series that a combination of some of the SharePoint MVPs and members of my team put together that actually walk you through. It's, I believe, a 6-part series that walks you through how to do everything that we tried to do in the last 75 minutes this afternoon. So great way to get going on this. And as I say, if you're doing with 2010, it's extremely easy because all the individual pieces just work for you. You don't have to go in and start tweaking. And we will update it for 2012 as soon as I get back to Redmond and make my team do that. So with that, I apologize that in the attempt to get all these little pieces and parts moving around, whoa, that's not the right. Well, wow, they didn't update that part. Please do an evaluation. Please be kind. No, seriously, I do appreciate the time. I do apologize that we didn't actually get to see the whole continuous thing go, but hopefully the real value of it was just seeing how you go approach it and what pieces you need to do. And hopefully it didn't look so scary that you can't take it on and go do it, right? I mean, it is a modest amount of work. With files that already work, now it's just a matter of tweaking it for your needs. You don't have to be an expert in this stuff. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you've had a great first part of the week and enjoy the last day or so of the conference. And that's it. Thanks.